Hi there, and welcome to Cretan Classics. I am Davey Cretan. I would like to introduce everyone to my special guest today. You know him from Tim's Vinyl Confessions, his YouTube channel. You know him from The Contrarians. He's been on Sea of Tranquility and dozens of other YouTube channels. Please welcome, for the first time to Cretan Classics, Tim Durling.
Thank you very much, Davey. It is such a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I appreciate this. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, this has been a long time coming. I was supposed to interview you in the past. It didn't work out because of our schedules, and we had to reschedule this interview a couple of times. So I am pleased as punch that it is finally happening.
All in
Now,
good time. Everything in its time.
yes. Now we're going to mainly talk about Tim's brand new book and all his books under the name Tim Durling. You could find them on Amazon. And we're here to talk about On Record, the April Wine album review book. So this will be the main thrust of our conversation. But I just want to go through Tim's history as an author. And before we start, and before you hold up your first book, what made you decide to become an author a little bit later in life, maybe than your friend Martin Popoff, for example?
It was the strangest set of circumstances. I had no thoughts on doing this. I would say even 6 years ago. Uh, just never occurred to me. I enjoyed doing my YouTube channel. I enjoyed interacting with people. I kind of write for a living. I'm a commercial writer in radio up here in Canada. Is my main gig. But it just never occurred to me, and honestly, it probably would never have happened without um without the advent of so many of us ending up working from home about 6 years ago. Y'all remember that? To be honest, the time since then is all the years kind of all blur into each other. So my books kind of help me to demarcate the time because it has been kind of a blur. But anyway, it started from there. I had, dare I say, more time to think. But really, I have to. You mentioned Martin Popoff, and he had a lot to do with it. So let's see. I guess the idea for my very first book goes back to the mid 90s, but it wasn't a book idea, it was just a concept. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But this is actually kind of fitting because you are sporting a very cool Rush tour shirt because you got to see them at the Garden, which is
Lovely.
awesome. And so I haven't been on in a while, but I'm a member of the Rush fans page, all one word. And I've appeared on there many times, gotten to know some really cool people, not least of which is the amazing Donna Halper. Also met Ben Mink, Andy Curran. Yeah, very, very cool. But anyway, I did a panel on there, and I think it was one of the first times I appeared on there. And Martin was also a panelist. And I don't even know if I remember what the topic was, but I was very excited to talk to Martin because I've been a fan of his books going all the way back to 1993 with his very first book, Riff Kills Man. Now, I don't have all his books. I don't have that much money. And I tend to only buy books about bands that I like, but I really liked his writing style, and I've got a lot of his books. And so we did there was a bunch of us. We did the panel, and then I wanted to have Martin come on my channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and talk. I wanted to talk to him about the very popular, very cool subject of 8-track tapes. Very trending, very hip. Sarcasm, um, but I'm not the type of person that just I find it very hard to just reach out to someone cold. I have a really hard time with that. I always feel like I'm bugging people, which is not a good attitude to have if you're trying to, network. But uh, it's just something I have to deal with. I have to just say, okay, just do it already. Just send the email, send a message, whatever. But I wanted to message Martin because he meets people all the time. He talks to a million people. I thought, okay, well, while it's still fresh in his mind, I said, "Hey, Martin, we were just on the Rush fans panel together. I talked about this and this and this. Wondering if you'd like to come on my channel and talk about this." And he came right back. He said, "Yeah, sure. That sounds like fun." Now, what I wanted to talk to Martin about was because Martin's about 10 years older than me, and he was buying albums, starting in the early 70s, really. So he would have lived through the period where records were, probably the most popular format, and then there was cassettes, and then there was eight tracks, and he would have seen CDs emerge as a new technology, and then that format shift and all of that. But I wanted to find out what he remembered about eight tracks as far as when he started to notice them disappearing from store shelves, because that's always been fascinating to me. And then in the mid 90s, as I referenced before, when I talked about, or when I discovered that record clubs, Columbia House, RCA Music Service, when I discovered they continued making eight tracks in the 1980s after they stopped selling them in retail stores. So retail stores really, by the end of 1982, you really weren't seeing eight tracks, new albums coming out on eight tracks in stores, with just a handful of exceptions. But it was mostly records and cassettes, and then CDs came on the scene. But if you were a member of one of those record clubs, not everything, but a lot of major label titles came out all the way through November of 1988. And that blew my mind when I found that out, because I was
That's
buying albums
fascinating.
by then and I had no idea that, what are you talking about, making these albums on 8 track? That's craziness to me. And so I talked to Martin about it. And he had no idea because it was a US thing primarily. In Canada, we kind of stopped around 1984. So we still went a little bit past that retail date, but not as long. So there aren't the titles that you just like your eyes pop up and go, I can't believe such and such exists in the 8 track format. In other words, in Columbia House, there was a 3 year period where you had to choose which format you wanted, and you had four formats to choose from. You could choose from vinyl, cassette, 8 track, or compact disc. So 8 tracks and compact disc coexisting makes no sense to me. It's like dinosaurs and
Bizarre.
humans coexisting. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, he had no idea that some of these titles were released in this format. Because he was like most people. He said he just kind of figured late 70s or turn of the 80s, that was it. And it was from a retail perspective. He said, I think you have a book idea here. And I took that to heart because I like, if Martin Popoff thinks I have a book idea, then I must be onto something. So this would have been early 2021. And at this point in time, I talked to my very good friend Matt Phillips, he has a company called Go North Design. He's a designer by trade. He has done work on all of my books. They wouldn't look the way they do without his eye for detail and all of that. So I always have to give props to him, because they wouldn't exist without him. I said, "What do you think? Could we do something like this?" And he said, "Yeah, it might be fun." So we put it out as a Kickstarter in the second half of 2021, and it exceeded our expectations. I don't have an exact number of how many books that we sold, but it was well over 100, which for such a niche subject was pretty impressive. And this is the book, Unspooled, an Adventure in 8 Tracks. So Martin actually contributed the forward to this book. And I mentioned Donna Halper. Any Rush fan, if you don't know her name, shame on you, but she contributed a back cover blurb. And it's just a gorgeous coffee table book. This one, unlike my other books, is full color, and it's got, I would call, eye-popping graphics on just about every page. There is some biographical stuff in there, but not a lot, because who cares about me? But it's a journey through the 1980s, and it just about takes care of the whole decade, because 1981 is where we start, because 1981 was the first year where it looked like there were some 8 track tapes that didn't have retail versions. And once you collect them, you could tell the difference between a retail and a club version very quickly, especially 8 tracks, because they look so very different.
Yes.
Records, not so much. You had to kind of look at the fine print,
The
right? But
small print.
eight tracks and cassettes, you could tell. So that did really, really well. And this was like physically getting them sent. We had him sent to Matt's place because he lives in a bigger city, and I would go down, take a day off, and go down, and we would spend the day packaging them because we sold them in different tier levels. It was a really, really great, successful Kickstarter campaign. We more than met the goal for it, and but it was a lot of mailing out, a lot of packaging, and a lot of work and a lot of fun work. And that was that. I thought, hey, that's cool. I wrote a book. I wasn't thinking more at this point. What changed that was, I'm going to say, well, it would have been the second half of 2023. I did an interview with a guy by the name of Julian Gill, who people should know that name, especially if you're a Kiss fan. He's MrKissFAQ.com. He's written several Kiss books, several other books too on other bands. But I was interviewing him about one of his latest books, and I noticed at the end of it, it said printed by Amazon. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I asked him, I said, Julian, what's that about? Printed by Amazon. And essentially you can set it up on a print to order basis. You don't have to have 100 copies printed up, sitting in your, and pay for them and get them shipped to you and have to ship them out and hope they all sell. It's basic on a, you know, somebody wants a book, we run one off kind of thing. Um, and once I had time to let that settle, and I guess Matt and I both talked to Julian about that because he would have been the one that had to design it, and there's a certain template that they use. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll do another one. And this time around, this like the Unspooled is an anomaly in terms of the subject matter. I mean, it is about music. Anything I write is going to be about music, but every other book that I've done has been on one group or one artist, and I just work easier that way. And my books, most of them are very much modeled after Martin Popoff's album by album series. Anybody who's ever bought one of his album by album books, it's when he talks to a bunch of different people virtually, probably very rarely in person, asks them all of them a bunch of the same questions about a particular album, gets the answers back, and he puts it all together as if everybody's sitting around a table having a conversation about this band and this particular album and this song, all of that. I picked up his Queen album by album, and it's still to this day probably my favorite book of his, of all the books he's done. I think I've read that more than any other. Something about that just, I mean, it helps if you like the band, right?
Hmm.
So there's that, but there's also, I like this idea. I like this idea of getting these different opinions from all of these different places, from musicians, from non-musicians, from just fans. Like just it didn't seem to matter. From people who had been in them into a band from the get-go, from people who just got into them a few years ago. And I thought I could work with a format like that. I could see where that would be really something I could sink my teeth into.
Exactly.
So the
And
next,
yeah,
go
moving
ahead.
on to your second book.
Yeah,
I
that
do
takes us
not,
into the second book.
right. I do not own the 8-track book, so I need to order that. That's the one omission out of the seven that I do not have. But moving on to the second book, Down for the Count, the Y&T album review. What made you choose for your first book on one band or one artist, Y&T of all bands?
Because they are one of my favorite bands, and they have been for about 36 years now. And I have never understood why they didn't break big because I think they had all the ingredients to do so at different points in their career. So they're still probably one of the biggest cult bands in the world because they've never had a gold or platinum album, but they're so good. And they came close a few times, but they just never made it to that next level for various, who knows why. But I guess it's kind of always been in the back of my mind that if I was going to do a book on one band, the one band would probably have been Y&T. Because number one, I'm a huge fan, absolutely huge fan. And number two, I mean, I still to this day don't think there's been any other books written about this group. Nobody in the band ever put out a book. They've been mentioned in books, but there's never been a book that's solely focused on Y&T.
Right.
And that kind of in a lot of ways set the standard for the books that I would do, with one exception. But I am much more interested in doing books about bands that don't have 100 books written about them. I find it more refreshing because, you know, like you and I, we're both Rush fans. I'm an enormous Rush fan, like dyed in
Mhm.
the wool Rush fan, you know. I don't have a Rush book in me. There are so many great Rush books. I don't have an angle to write a book that just wouldn't be a rehash of someone else's work. I don't have a new angle on it. I'm not saying it would never happen. I'd say I would need to have an angle that I would think somebody would look at that and go, "Hey, that's cool. I never thought about that before." I've always kind of, and I think this is a good attitude to have. You got to do it because you enjoy it. But I've always looked at it as a fan of whoever, what would I like to see and read about? Who would I like to see a book about? And the odd thing is, of all of the groups that I've written about, Y&T are by far the least popular in terms of overall worldwide knowledge of the band. Those that know them inside out.
Yes.
But you ask your average rock fan, who are you talking about? What do you say? What do you even say? Y&T? What does that stand for? Like what? I would run into that all the time. People would trip on the name. Or you might get someone that goes, "Oh yeah, Summertime Girls." Yes, and so much more. Um, so that book to this date is my best-selling book by a pretty wide margin. Like
Excellent.
that book that blew me away the way that that book started selling. I could not believe it. Like it was more than I had. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect when I got into this in the first place. And I should mention too, with the Unspooled, the first thing that happened through Amazon is we brought out a second edition of Unspooled, so it was available to order again. Because I did have a few people who had messaged me and said, "Boy, I still wish you had some of your books. I never got around to getting one." So now it's like, okay, well that's available. There's a new edition of it, pretty much the same thing. A couple things that were changed in it, but not much. But with the Y&T book, it far exceeded my expectations. And I think there's a few reasons for it. Number one, I think fans were like, finally, somebody's done a book on Y&T. Finally, it's taken till 2023, but someone's finally written a book about this band. I'm buying it. Of course, the other thing and the unique thing about this is that I had the incredible good fortune of getting to know, well, via email and one phone call, the legendary Hugh Syme, who is one of the premier rock album cover designers. I mean, yes, the easiest thing, I mean, I always say this and I'll stand by it. Anybody watching my channel or your channel, you've got something in your collection that Hugh Syme designed the album cover art for.
Yes.
I can almost guarantee it. Number one, if you're a Rush fan, you already know this. With the exception of the first album and Fly By Night, everything since then, Hugh Syme. Whether it's a single, whether it's a home video, uh, post, officially released posters, tour books, Hugh Syme. He's the guy. It's a given. Even the new tour imagery, all of that, that's all Hugh Syme, which is mind blowing itself in and of itself. But the reason that I got in contact with Hugh was because I was trying to get um, people that were in and around the Y&T orbit. And the first person I talked to was a guy named John Taylor Dismukes, which is not a name that people would recognize right away unless you're really into reading your liner notes. But as far in Y&T context, Black Tiger, Mean Streak, and Rock We Trust, he did those album covers. which are probably their three of their most popular albums. He also did that Best of 81 to 85 and Face Melter, which is so far the most recent Y&T album. He did the second Winger album. He did the first Lynch Mob album. He did a couple Keel albums like The Right to Rock, Final Frontier. He's got a style that you could pick up on once you know
Definitely.
it's him. Yeah. I never heard back from him, which is fine. Now, Hugh Syme didn't have an extent as extensive, work with Y&T, but he did do the Contagious album in 1987. So I said, "Oh, what the heck?" I sent him a message through his website, and he got back to me, which is amazing. Gave me his phone number, and so we had probably about a 2 hour conversation. And that guy is a talker. I mean, the amazing stories he was telling me about working with Neil Peart, and I'm trying not to fanboy out because I mean I'm talking to this guy about Y&T, who I'm a huge fan of, but Rush is just like everything. You know what I mean? Like, and this guy is he was the visual component of this amazing music. Those Farewell to Kings and Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures, they would just your mind's eye would see the images as you're listening to the music. He's responsible for it, telling me about conversations he had with Neil and Terry Brown and Ray Daniels, arguing with him over the Signals album cover. What does this have to do with rock and roll? And just I could have talked to him for hours and hours and hours. So I asked him, Hugh, I was just wondering if I could get a quote from you on what you remember about working on that Y&T album. And I mean, that's his job. He does so many of these things. He didn't remember a lot about that particular. He remembered working for John Kalodner and Geffen Records. And see, he designed the 1987 Whitesnake album. And once that went huge, he started getting all kinds of work in that genre. So he's worked with all different kinds of artists. And Contagious was just one of them. So we talked for a little bit. I did get a quote from him on it, but he said, "Tim, have you got somebody designing a book cover for you?" Which I thought, did Hugh Syme just ask if I wanted him to design a? So, I made it very clear. I said, "Hugh, that would be, an honor. It'd be wonderful." I said, "But I have no budget. It's just me. I'm just, you know what I mean? There's not low budget. It's no budget." Anyway, he gave me a very, very generous deal that I was able to, get it done for. And yeah, we held it up, but he came back with this gorgeous cover, this steampunk based cover where he essentially created a new logo for the band.
Yes.
Like, so you got the T, the today in the foreground and the Y in the background. And it reminded me of the Queensryche album covers that he did, like Promised Land and Here in the Now Frontier. That's what the colors and stuff reminded me of. But
Yes.
the coolest thing about all of that, and I know we want to get through all the books, so I'll try to speed it up a little bit. But for those that don't know, the album cover that he did design for Y&T, yes, is Contagious. So you've got basically a vial of some sort of caustic substance breaking. So on the cover of the Y&T book, over the T, he's got a vial of some caustic substance, which I didn't notice at first. And that was like an Easter egg that made me just so happy that I loved it. Now I love it more because that's a nod to his own work. And there is no question that cover artwork by Hugh Syme, there's some legitimacy that comes with that. People were like, okay, well, this guy, whoever this Tim Durling is, he's got to be real, for real.
Yeah, there's
So
some
there's no question. Yeah,
cachet with the
there's
name Hugh
no
Stein.
question that helped. But I mean, I couldn't do that every time. And like I said, my buddy Matt, I stand by his work. I think his work is as good as anybody's. And I've always said to people, you need design work done, talk to him. He knows what he's doing.
Go North. Yes.
Go North Design because he's got an eye for detail that I just he notices things that I would never ever notice. These little things that mean a lot. Just these little tweaking of details. So
Easter eggs.
that
Speaking of that, the
yes,
third
and
book.
then so the next book, Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas Album Review. Now this book cover, I'm going to be completely honest, I'm going to describe it as AI assisted because Matt got this rough rendering back, but it doesn't look anything like this does. He made it just a beautiful album cover. and it has references to so many of Kansas album covers.
Yes.
I mean, some are more obvious than others. You've got the ship, you know, you've got the sailor, you've got the violin. But the more you look, you'll see, you know, there's a plane, there's an anvil, there's a monolith. Um,
Well, don't give
inside,
everything
yeah,
away.
there's a little something tucked inside the boat,
Yes.
which, but anyway. And so this was my next book. And Kansas are obviously a band that have sold, you know, millions of albums, and they've got, you know, some at least two classic rock staples. But there's never been a book that just talked about their music that I was aware of. And they've long since been one of my favorite bands. And I think that as much as they are sort of, you know, at the top of that second tier of classic rock, I think they should have been first tier. I think that they should be talked about in the same breath as you talk about Rush or Yes or Foreigner or Journey. I think they should be right up there. Um, and that was a pretty easy choice for me to do another book about. And that book is my second best-selling book. That book continues to sell very well.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I'm really happy with how that came out. And I would like nothing more than to have to do another edition of any of these if any of these bands put another album out. But so far that hasn't happened. So far all of my books are as up to date, you know, pretty much up to date.
That's great
Um,
news.
so that was my second, and it was also a panel book. Both of these books were panel books. So, you know, I didn't want to call them album by album because that's kind of Martin's thing, and it's actually more to the point. It's sort of one of his publishers' things. So I didn't want to get there. So I would say, but one thing I did get from Martin is take an album title or a song title that makes for a good title. I'm pretty sure it was Martin that suggested I call the Y&T one Down for the Count because you're not counting them, but you're talking about them, you know. So that made sense to me. So the Kansas one I called "Let It Be Your Guide" because that makes for a good title for a book that's a study of something. It's also a lyric from the song on the other side.
One of
So
my favorite Kansas songs.
yeah. And the other thing, I've been having fun with putting things in that the diehard fans will pick up on because I like doing that myself. I love Easter eggs. Um, So for the spine of the Kansas book, I said, I want a red impact font on a white background because I want it to look like the old CBS CDs, which many of the Kansas ones look like that. So that's why I did that. It's not exactly the font that CBS used, but it's pretty close.
It is.
I
I
think they
worked
might
in
have.
record stores for
Yeah,
years,
yeah.
so I can
So
attest to
this
that.
is very familiar. Cassettes did this with the band name, maybe not
Mhm.
the album title, but CDs. Oh yeah, this is what they looked like, you know. And you'd have a catalog number here, yeah, yeah. And I'm such a nerd for stuff like that. And response to that book was great. As a matter of fact, two fans, and I'm so grateful to them, lived in Topeka, uh, or still do, and knew Kerry Livgren and presented him with a copy of this book. And Kerry posted about this on his Facebook. And I thought, wow, that's all the seal of approval I need. When Mr. Kansas himself, I mean, he's not in the band, but I mean, without him, there would have been no Kansas. I mean, his music, his lyrics, his songs. Yeah, that was mind blowing. I also had the pleasure of having John Elephant answer some questions for me about the two albums that he was on. I talked to Denise de Lacerda, who designed the lovely artwork for the last two Kansas studio albums as a chapter with her. So, and since then, I've gotten to know Tom Brislin, the current keyboard player for Kansas, and so I
Great
when
play.
I yeah, and when I do a book on a particular artist, I on my YouTube channel I'll do a deep dive, as you know. We
Yes.
talk about a particular album, and by the time it came around to the Absence of Presence, I had Tom on, and we talked about the album he played on, which was amazing, you know. Um, so that was the next one that came out very well, and of course after that it's well, and usually it's while the other one is close to coming out, I'm always working on something.
A few
So yes,
projects ahead.
yeah, and I think you kind of have to. Yeah, so the next one I'm a huge Sammy Hagar fan. I'm completely unapologetic about that. When 5150 came out, that was my Van Halen entry point. I will defend that stuff forever. Of course, I love the older stuff too, but this is when I got on board. And there had never been a book just on Hagar's solo career, which is pretty extensive. I don't think people realize just how many albums this guy did and has done. He's been very prolific, a lot more than a lot of his peers, in this century. So this was a lot of fun to do. The difference in this book is that I wrote this one myself because I had a lot that I wanted to say. So many things I wanted to say about so many of these albums. These are, these books, they're meant to be just that, guides. If you're interested in digging into any of these catalogs, have one of these handy. I do offer some opinions, but it's mostly factual. Here are the albums, here are the songs, this is what it looks like. Here's kind of what I think about. So hopefully by the end of it, you get an idea of, well, Tim's doesn't seem as big on this album, but it kind of sounds like something I'd like. So maybe I'll start with this one. Or he really likes this album, and it kind of sounds like something I'd like. So, you know, it's all here. And this one, I've gotten to know Greg Renoff, who's a fantastic author, and he wrote the amazing Van Halen Rising. He also was the ghostwriter on the Ted Templeman autobiography. Great writer. He wrote the foreword to this, which was a real honor. It's diehard Van Halen fans know who Greg Renoff is. So to have him contribute to this meant a lot. I mean, I've gotten to know so many cool people through doing these, yourself included. It's been a
Oh, thank you.
real fun journey doing this, and so I thought, there's no reason to stop. There's just no reason to stop. So I kept on going, and so far, the next one is the biggest one I've done yet as far as page count. Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. And I mean, Sing Me Away, how perfect a title is that for a book of, it just makes sense, right? This book did incredibly well. You did very well. And, now we're back to doing a panel book. You're in here. You've contributed some great stuff. And your background working in retail and record stores makes for some great stories. Like, it's one thing for me, just as a music buyer, to say, I don't think MZA did a very good job promoting such and such. But you can attest to the fact that I know they didn't do a very good job because other labels would send us this and this and this and this for promo items. MCA didn't send us squat. So no wonder some of these albums tanked. So
And
you can speak to that.
yes, and back in the day, somehow it filtered down to the record stores. I don't even know how we heard this, but we started calling MCA the Music or Musical Cemetery of America. MCA, Music
Yeah,
Cemetery of America. And it was a joke that started, if you could look it up on the internet, there are a couple of different sources to how it started, but somehow it filtered down to the retail world. And there are bands that could attest to this. My friend on another channel interviewed Rick Emmett, and he called MCA the Music Cemetery of America.
yeah,
And Rick Emmett, he didn't comment on it, but the look on his face, he had a smirk. He smiled and chuckled a little, like, yeah, I know all about MCA. And bands like Jafria, of
yeah,
course, Night Ranger, Triumph, they could
yeah.
attest to how MCA in the 80s signed them, but then never really promoted them all that much.
And by the late 80s, it was terrible. You had Little River Band and Dennis DeYoung and all kinds of acts putting out, and they'd hit the delete bins within
Right
months.
away.
Yeah, like to the point where there are some albums, it's harder to find a retail version that doesn't have a punch out in it
Yes.
than it is to
Or a
find
cut
one.
on the old vinyl,
Yeah,
a little cut in the
yeah.
corner.
Or a cut on the cassette or a cut in the CD. I've got a it's A&M who I think are worse because of Y&T, but I found Brian Adams' Into the Fire on CD, and the cut within the CD is so deep
Yes.
it almost hits the CD
I've
itself.
seen those. Yeah.
Like, it is deep. But yeah, the Night Ranger, even more so than Y&T, I was like, why has there never been a Night Ranger book? They sold millions of albums. They've had top 10 and I love that band. So yeah, so it was just like I'm going in, I'm doing it. And so, and I've been alternating between here's a panel book, here's one that's all me. Here's a panel book, Here's one that's all me. So now that brings us to my, I guess to use a fancy term like gymnasium, to paraphrase Gene Simmons, my penultimate book, my second to last book, which came
One of
out
my
late last
favorite
year.
words. Now,
Yeah,
this is a bit of
penultimate.
an odd one because
Very much.
it is
Yes.
about Fleetwood Mac
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
the
for a lot
great
of
Keith
reasons.
Pardo
Yeah. Yeah.
doing the
So,
forward here. Now, why of all bands did you pick after staying in the hard rock realm? It's not really metal, but the bands you've done are hard rock
right.
for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. I
Yep.
would categorize them that way. But then
Yep.
you come to a band, a hugely commercial band, but a band
Yep.
that's had so many eras and different lineups over 50 some odd years. Why Fleetwood Mac?
Not only are they musically different than the other books or the bands that I've done books on.
Uh, Tim is frozen, so I'll just show a little bit of
Hey.
the inside of
Oh,
the book.
yeah.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah, I froze up. I was going to say with Fleetwood Mac, not only are they hugely popular, but there have been a ton of books written on them. There have been books written about just one album. So, yeah, why did I do a Fleetwood Mac book? Well, I'll tell you. Uh once I started to put books out, obviously I've been blown away by the support that I've had, and I'm lucky enough to have very supportive family on both sides of my family. And Fleetwood Mac's actually a band that I, of course, was aware of from the time I started listening to the radio, but they were never really in my wheelhouse. They were never on my radar. They were just sort of off the side. They were a band I heard on the radio. When my wife and I got together, they're one of her favorite bands. And so I started hearing songs that I'd never heard before. And I was like, wow, there's some really cool stuff on here. And wow, Lindsey Buckingham is an incredible guitar player. And I just never realized how intricate some of these songs are. And at a certain point, a few years ago, my mother-in-law very offhandedly just said, Tim, when are you going to write me a book on Fleetwood Mac? Because I'm telling you, it wouldn't have happened. But I thought about it. I'm like, well, if I was going to, how would I approach that? But as someone who was still kind of wet behind the ears with the band and getting into them, I thought what I could have used is a book that went through every single one of their albums and kind of guided you through all of the musical changes that occurred, all of the lineup changes that occurred, and there were just so many albums.
Yes.
So, most of my listener's guide, album review, they're similarly titled. I called this one a beginner's companion to Fleetwood Mac because that's really what it is. It's meant for the not that diehard fans wouldn't enjoy this book, but someone who say had rumors, or maybe they had this 75 self-titled, or maybe they have the dance, but they wanted to go further. They said, "Well, I know that they've got these beginning periods where they were a blues rock band, and I know that there was the Bob Welsh period, but I know there was stuff after, in later years. Where do you even start? Because there are just so many albums." That's what this was written to do. And I love how this cover is another story too. This Matt didn't design the cover, he designed the book. This pencil drawing was done by Sally Ann Morgan, who's my wife's best friend. She was the maid of honor when we got married, and I've seen her do pencil drawings of pets. She's done a couple of two of our previous pets, and they were beautiful. They were really, really good. So I knew she could do something like this. And I've always seen on the internet they'll have like a kid listening to headphones with a stereo and says, "Remember your first time?" And it'll just be a square where an album was. I said, "Well, I want something like that." But with Fleetwood Mac, they tend to use penguins as their mascot. So I thought, let's have a penguin, have a top hat and a cane sitting by the record player, and have this penguin with the Fleetwood Mac record in hand listening to it. And she came back with this, and I'm like, because it's sometimes very, very hard to explain a concept to someone that you can see in your mind's eye, but you can't really draw it for them. Because if I could draw it, I would have done it. But she came back with this, and I'm like, no notes. That is exactly what I was going for. I really wanted it to look homespun. I wanted to look the absolute opposite of an AI. That's something I want to rant about a little bit, if you don't mind, Davey.
That's okay.
There are so many awful AI generated covers coming out. I can't stand it. Um, and it almost seems like when I put a book out, there'll be some other ones pop up on Amazon that are about the same artist, but they've got these horrific AI covers. There's a Sammy Hagar one, similar coloring to mine, but you can tell it's AI by looking at it, and it makes me want to vomit every time I look at it. And when it first appeared on Amazon, there wasn't even a credited author. So what does that tell you?
That it's bogus. It's
It's
fake.
completely bogus. And you read the reviews, and the reviews speak to themselves. Like, I work very hard, and I have a very good friend of mine named Bug Campbell who works on the proofreading because I want this to be as good as it can possibly be. And I don't want, you're bound to have a little grammar mistake or maybe a spelling mistake here or there, but if there's too many of them, they take you out of the book and it looks like work hasn't been put into it. So I really try to make these as good as possible, but you're never going to get it perfect. But I'll see these books that are supposedly about a band, and I'll look at them. I'm like, tell me who those people are. They don't look like anybody in the band.
Right.
And by the way, one of them's got six fingers. Like, I really hate it. I even hate when I see event posters like that. It's like, I would rather see a pencil drawing. I would rather see your 3-year-old nephew try and draw something. At least it's real. I
And
really hate it.
and the
And I would
great thing
hate for
about
anybody to be
this,
fooled.
the coloring is reminiscent of the
Oh, and
the
that was I wanted
self-titled
to, yeah,
album
yes. It's
with the
so many
first
of them. The
appearance of
Tusk,
Stevie.
it looks
Yep.
like, yeah,
And yep.
yeah, it's
Tusk and
very,
Rumors. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's great
Yes,
coloring. It's eye-catching. It's black and white,
yeah,
grayish, but it's very eye-catching.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
kudos
that's the
on this
thing.
cover.
Thank you. Yes. And the thing is too, I would love to have all color in all of my books. It just costs. I would have to charge so much for them, and I'd make so little and sell less. But you know what? I think the black and white it reads really, really well. It
Yes.
does look really, really well. It gives you an idea of what it looks like. It's not pixelated. It's not blurry or distorted. I think it translates very, very well.
No, it's
Um,
a great aesthetic, and now it's your aesthetic, except for Unspooled, which is
Yeah,
in full
and
color.
Unspooled, that's kind of its own thing, right? And you did mention our good friend, the wonderful Pete Pardo from Sea of Tranquility, contributed a lovely forward to my Fleetwood Mac book. And by the way, folks, support Pete any way you can. Uh,
Definitely.
anyway,
And we wish
yes.
him the best.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, he's been a great support to me too. Like I've been on a couple times, taught him a book. Pete contributed to my Kansas book. So yeah, yeah. Just one of the good guys for sure. So yeah, I mean that definitely got me attention that I didn't have before. I'm not saying it sold more. I'm just saying it got me into some different interview segments because it is kind of a different band. And so I'm really happy with how that came out. And it's still very accurate. And one of the happy accidents that happened as I was working on that book was that the Buckingham Nicks album was finally officially issued, reissued and issued on CD.
Yes.
And so that's in there. I have a little sidebar on that because that's so close to being a Fleetwood Mac album. Yeah, I like how that came out, and that still serves as somebody who really wants to dig deeper into this band, not just the greatest hits, and really learn like, wow, there's so much more to this band. And what it's done for me, and I've told this to everybody, I've got such an appreciation and enjoyment of the Bob Welsh era albums from the early 70s. Those are so really, really good and such an important bridge between the Peter Green Blues era and the Buckingham Nicks era because they're kind of already there in that sort of California soft rock,
Yes.
especially when you have Christine singing, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it just sounds like Fleetwood Mac, but there are some fantastic songs on those Bob Welsh albums. So those
100%.
are those are hidden gems that need
They're
to. Some of them sold quite well.
undervalued.
Yeah.
Totally undervalued. I worked with so many guys in the record stores who used to play those albums and turn me on to them. I
Yeah.
said, wait, I know this song because Bob Welch had a hit
Yeah.
with Sentimental
That's
Lady
right. So
later
Bare
on.
Trees is a great album. Mystery to Me. I mean, it's all really, really good stuff.
Great
Future
stuff.
Names. Yeah. So yeah, that's been the I because I when I'm working on an album, I listen to everything. I listen to the catalog over and over and over again and make sure it's fresh. That's never been, an exception. But with the Fleetwood Mac ones, it was like there was just so much to dive into. But I still gonna maintain that Time is a horrible, horrible album.
And I
Just
showed that before when I was opening the book.
yeah.
And I remember when that came out on CD at my store, and it was a huge bomb. Becca Bramlett, Dave Mason on that record, very talented people,
Yeah, but
but the songs are not there.
songs are
There's
all like
nothing memorable.
it's so bland. If it was any more bland, it would come in a CD that said band album. Like it was it you know, it's almost like it's like the stock photo version of a Fleetwood Mac album. It is and I was still working in radio at that point, and I'm being completely honest. It wasn't till years later that Fleetwood Mac put out an album in 1995. I had no idea. That's how under the radar this was. But anyway, it's in there because
Yes.
they did it. So, um, by the same token, I think that the album that Buckingham and McVie did in 2017 is a Fleetwood Mac album,
Those
and
two,
I
yes.
treat it as such because it's a Fleetwood Mac album in all but name. But that's another story.
And no Stevie, but that's a
But that's
totally
it.
different story.
But that's and that's probably well that's I know that's why. That no that's what.
Yes.
But yeah. So that's that and that brings us up
Brings
to
us to
which
2026.
is crazy to me because 6 years ago, well, almost 6 years, a little over 6 years ago, I had no books. Now I've
Now
got
you have
seven.
seven.
And it's taken me this long to do a book on a band from my home country.
Yes,
But
which is
but
my first question. These guys are from the Canadian Maritimes, where you're based, basically.
yeah.
So, for a band that's from your area and that you've been a fan of for years, why is this your seventh book and not your first, second, or even third book?
Well, yeah, I mean there's a lot of reasons for that. I've got a lot of books that I want to do, but you're limited by time and you're limited by I can't do them all at once. But you're right, it is kind of odd that it's taken me this long, but the Y&T sort of it was important to me that I got that out. At the time I was working on these books, it was very important to me that this artist gets what I think, is needed for, you know, maybe not like in the case of Sammy Hagar, most people know who Sammy Hagar is, but they usually they know of him in context of Van Halen. Oh, he's the guy that sold the tequila. Oh, he sings I Can't Drive 55. Yes. And he's got X amount of solo albums over the years. So anyway, yeah, it was a foregone conclusion. I knew unless someone else came along and did it, that there needed to be an April Wine album guide because there had never been. I don't think that most people realize just how many albums this band put out. There's 16 studio albums to talk about here.
That's a lot.
Uh, that's a lot. And some people probably think they had 4 or 5 albums at the turn of the 80s because that's when they were the most popular. Now, obviously, here in Canada, it's a little bit of a different story. April Wine are they're sort of an institution here. They
Yes.
have about a dozen songs that still get regular radio airplay, whether it's classic rock or whether it's just I guess what you'd call an oldie station now that plays 70s, 80s stuff. They had songs in different styles. They were never a hard rock band. They were a rock band that rocked pretty hard sometimes, but they had great, great ballads. They had folky stuff. They had, bluesy stuff. It's more varied than I think most people realize. And also, yeah, that's the other thing. I don't think most people realize how, number one, how long they've been around and how many albums they did. So, yeah, it made sense that, in its time, and it actually worked out very well timing wise, considering what went on this year in April Wine's career, which I had knew nothing about. I was already working on the book, but it just turned
Right.
out to be serendipitous. And you also this was another book that I had a lot of fun with an Easter egg on the spine. Some people might get it, some people might not. But I will
Is
say,
it the old Capitol Records?
in Canada, Capitol's back catalog cassettes from like starting around the mid 80s all looked like that. So because April Wine Aquarius Records, their Canadian label, was distributed by Capitol. There are a lot of April Wine cassettes that look that way with that grayish blue. So I knew that was what I wanted this to look like on the side. And that's something that I had to convince Matt of it because he said, "Why do you want the spine to look completely different from the front and back?" I said, "Matt, trust me. People that get it will go, oh, look at that. It looks like the old cassettes."
It was
I'm such a
similar in
nerd.
America,
Yeah.
slightly different here.
Yeah. If I wanted them to look like the old Capitol cassettes in the States, I would have had them be like yellow with red lettering, say.
Mhm.
I'm such a nerd for that stuff. It's some, it's a disease and I don't recommend it. But I have a lot of fun with it. But mostly I wanted to get it out. Here are all the band's albums. These are all the lineup changes. Here are the songs. Here are the B-sides, and I got a great panel of people working on this one that did this one as well. And I mean, their second album was called On Record. It doesn't get much more perfect than an album review book title than that. So that's why I went with that. But yeah, this is the response to this has been really good because yeah, there's a lot of people that are like, I'm so glad somebody's done a book on April Wine's music. The late Miles Goodwin, who was their main singer, songwriter, basically the leader of the band, he put out a great memoir about 10 years ago called Just Between You and Me. Um, that is basically the story of April Wine through his eyes. But I'm not interested in bios because I'm interested in the music. I'll read a bio that somebody else did, but I'm not really interested in writing that way. I like writing about the music. I like getting people's opinions about the music and and kind of sewing it all together to make it sound like a continuous conversation. And that's, of course, I picked that up from the way that Martin does his books. But I like the format. I just do. It's very intimate, and you also get so much input that you wouldn't normally get if you were just like there's trade-offs. When I write a book that's all me, it's certainly quicker, but getting other people's opinions and in this case, as you held up, in the Harder Faster chapter, just to pick one name out there, Steve Deluxe from New Zealand, where April Wine were never ever big at all. So to get somebody talking about the band from his perspective, it's just, it's just a different take on things that you wouldn't get yourself. So I learn a lot from talking to these other people, even though I'm the one writing the books. I've learned stuff about everybody I've done a book about because of the input that I've had from the panelists. So it's been really
Great.
rewarding. And what it does is it deepens the appreciation of the music for me. Because if somebody mentions that they really like a song that I never really gave much thought about, I go back and listen to it and I'll go, they don't know what they're talking about. This sucks. No. Or I'll go, yeah, that really is good. Or this part here does remind me of this. Or I never really noticed that backing vocal before. Like just things like that that just deepen the appreciation. I hope that's what these books do for people. I hope it sends them right back to the back catalog. And I have had people tell me they've listened to the albums with the book in hand. And I love that. That is so gratifying. And the other thing that's gratifying is when people say, I had none or one or two albums by whoever it is. I got your book and I've got like 5 CDs coming. And I went out and bought this and I went out and bought that. So, like, that's what I've always wanted to do. That's why I started my YouTube channel, but that's what I've wanted to do with these bands that I've loved since I got into them. Like with Y&T, for example, I was in grade 11 and saying, yeah, I like Def Leppard and I like Skid Row and I like Y&T. And they'll go, oh, yeah, wait, what? And I hated the fact that I had to explain who they were. And you'd get the, well, if they're so good, why don't I know who they are? Oh, but I
That's
mean that.
A&M Records, I
But
was.
and then the pre-internet world, there's not much you can do, right? You know. Um, but anyway, I digress. But that's just I've always tried to sort of be like a spokesperson for some of these underdog bands and go, yes, this band is great. Yes, that band is great. Would you consider like, if you like these bands, you'll probably like this band. that sort of thing. That's been, my goal. So it's really gratifying when people come back and say they've started listening to somebody because of one of my books. That's great. And that just makes me want to keep going and do more. I mean, if I stopped selling books, it wouldn't be much fun. But um so yeah, so I mean, it's pretty crazy, like to go from 0 books to 7 in just a few years. And I've got one now that's pretty much complete, just needs put together design wise. And then as you know, I'm working on another one. So, I mean, it's just a process. And I've got two more I haven't started, but I've got two more in mind, bands that I'd like to do. Like I said, unless somebody else comes out with one where I go, that's great, I'm just going to buy that. Because I try to write books, I try to perceive where there's a deficit that, there needs to be a book about this band. It doesn't mean it's going to be the best book about this band, but at least there'll be a book. It'll be
Right.
the best that I can do. But hopefully somebody will go, I wonder if anybody ever wrote a book on, oh, look, Tim Durling. Oh, the hell with that guy. No. Um, so yeah, it's just, I don't want to add, um, um, what am I trying to say? Not dead weight, but I don't want to add to an overabundance of books about the same band
Like
when I've got
Kiss, for
nothing
example. Kiss.
when I've got nothing new to say. And again, I'm a huge Kiss fan. There is no Kiss book in me. I've got nothing. There's been so many great ones. The same thing with Rush, same thing with Metallica, Van Halen, Aerosmith. Like the closest to a Van Halen book, of course, is the Sammy Hagar one. But there's some Van Halen content, but not much because it's concentrating on anyway. You get the idea.
Yeah, getting back to April Wine, since I'm closer in age to Martin Popoff than you are, I came into the band hearing I Like to Rock on
Yep,
New York Rock Radio with
yep.
Harder Faster in 1979 and 1980. And then of course in America, and that's certified, Harder Faster
Hard and
certified.
Faster, it's a gold, yeah, it's certified gold, and then the Nature of the Beast is platinum. Those are their only certifying albums in
Yes,
the
where
U.S.
I'm
But
going to next because
yeah,
this was the big
the
album
big one,
in
yeah,
New York, at least, because
yeah,
some bands are regional.
yeah,
But in New York, this is where we heard Sign of the Gypsy Queen all the time, and Just Between You and Me, which
yeah,
you said is the name of Miles' book. Now, since
yeah.
I came into them in the late 70s, early 80s, and since you're younger than I am, when did you first get into April Wine on your own?
So great questions. I mean, so yeah, so as you mentioned, yeah, there aren't any classic rock bands, any other classic rock bands that I can think of, unless I'm ignoring somebody really obvious, that started in the eastern part of Canada. Most big Canadian acts that came out of Canada either came from Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver. They formed in Waverly, Nova Scotia, which is outside of Halifax, which is a big city, but it's not New York, it's not Detroit, it's not Los
California.
Angeles.
Yeah.
It's not a big center for classic rock. And even closer to that, like at one point in the late 40s, Miles Goodwin's parents lived in Woodstock, New Brunswick, and that's where Miles was born. Well, fast forward till 1974, that's where I was born, and that's where I grew up. So we shared the same birthplace. I didn't know that for many years, but once I was like, that is so cool. Somebody that was born in the same town I was born in had a record that sold over 1 million copies in the US. So that's pretty cool. Um, I probably first, honestly, I probably first heard of them in the Nature of the Beast period, probably just between you and me on the radio, and being aware that there was a band called April Wine. But that's about it. I would have been 7 in 1981. I didn't actually get into them until 1993. And that's when they kind of came back after a hiatus with
Yes.
an album called Attitude, which is a fantastic hard rocking album. So a friend of mine lent me that CD and another CD, a compilation called All the Rockers. And that did it. That 1-2 punch did it. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to get into this band. It felt like a band that I should have already been into, but I got into them. So I've been a fan since the early 90s. Now, one thing that I kind of, it's a regret. I just wish that they had done more albums in latter years. There aren't a lot of, they only did two albums in the 2000s. I
Right.
just wish there was more music to talk about because I just really enjoy what they do and the stylistic changes and all of that. And they're just a good, solid rock band. They're the band I've seen in concert more than any other. And even though I've seen them in different lineups, they're still one of the tightest bands I've ever seen. So they've always had top-notch musicians playing, and they've got a catalog of songs that in Canada, like I said, in Canada, it's a different story than the rest of the world. They're quite well known, and people, I know people that have seen them, five times on one tour, or because they were just constantly touring the country, one end of the country to the other. Um, so they're kind of a minor institution up here.
Okay. Now, the big question I have for you is what do you think about the band continuing without Miles since he unfortunately passed recently?
Well, I'll do a short version of that because the answer to that question is in the epilogue to this book. So I had this book.
Tim is frozen again, unfortunately. Sometimes there are bad internet connections. So while Tim is frozen,
Oh, here
there
I'm
he's
frozen
back. He's
again. Oh,
back.
I'm back. Yeah. Um, when I found out about the Triumph reunion, first of all, I would have lost money on that because I never, ever, ever, ever thought that would happen. And
Same here.
I've been a fan of Triumph longer than I've been into April Wine. They've been a favorite of mine for years and years. By the time I started to go to concerts, they were broken up. So I didn't think there was ever a chance that I would ever see them. So there was no way I was going to miss this. And April Wine was the opening act for this tour. So to back up a little bit, I already had the book mostly written, and the epilogue was I had an epilogue written, and it was just talking about what they were doing now. It wasn't giving my opinion on it because I am so I think it's one of the most pointless things that you can do is waste any time hating something or complaining about something. So to go online and say, it's not April Wine without Miles Goodwin, well, good for you. Who cares? You're just being a troll. You're just being an arsehole, you know? Who cares?
Keyboard warriors. They have the
To,
anonymity.
but to myself, as a fan, I wasn't that excited about the prospect of Miles Goodwin less April Wine, of April Wine going up there without Miles Goodwin because he was the main songwriter, he was the main vocalist, he was the guitar, one of the guitar players, he played any piano parts. In so many ways, he was the sound of April Wine. And I was kind of surprised that they kept going. But I didn't say anything about it because who cares? Who cares what I think? Who cares what anybody thinks? I'm not gonna piss on anybody's enthusiasm if they're going to these shows and having fun. But like I said, there was no way I was going to miss this Triumph show. So I sat there and watched the current version of April Wine with Mark Parent on lead vocals and guitar, Brian Greenway, who's not an original member, but the senior member of the band and sort of the de facto leader now,
Yes.
and Richard Lantier on bass, and Roy Nickel on drums with that wonderful, one of my favorite logos of all time up on this big stage. It got them in front of big stages for the first time in a long time, and it got them on big stages in the US for the first time in a really long time. And what they didn't get for playing a full set, they made up for with coming out with this tight set of hit after hit after hit, and the people in the audience knew every single song and were singing along to every single song. And I sat there and thought, this music, people still want to hear it. People love these songs,
Yes.
and it's well played. Mark doesn't sound anything like Miles. They did not go down the Journey or Foreigner route and get a sound alike. They just wanted someone who could present the songs well, and that's what they've got. And this music is in good hands. And I was convinced on the spot. I was converted on the spot. I would go see these guys by themselves in a casino or, or doing a headline gig of their own. And in my head, even as they're finishing their set and even as Triumph is on the stage, in my head, I'm thinking when I get home, or well, the next day when I get up, I'm rewriting that epilogue. And I'm going to be quite honest and say, I was a skeptic, but I was wrong. And I used one of their old song titles for the title of the epilogue. I called it You Opened Up My Eyes. So what I would say to anybody that would be, be a keyboard warrior is go see them. Don't look at someone's cell phone footage. Go see them. You cannot say that the songs aren't being treated with respect. Miles is mentioned several times. The band talks about him. Um, One thing that Mark Parent has done is really learned Miles' guitar parts. They're they're dead on. And he's like I said, he sings the song well. The only thing that throws me is that he's bald with a beard. And after years and years of seeing Jerry Mercer on the drums,
Drummer, yes.
bald guy with a beard, to see a guy that looks like that out front with a guitar singing
It
is kind of a
throws you. Yeah,
head trip, right?
throws you for a second.
But yeah, that was really good timing. I'm glad that that happened before the book was finalized. I was able to bring that right up to date. I doubt there'll be any new music, and I don't know if there should be, but I will say that those songs are getting out there, played in front of people, and people are like, I like this band. Maybe I'll buy a couple of their albums. So just like what I'm doing with the books, that's what it's all about. It's I'm not gonna get
Spreading the
rich.
word.
I'm not gonna get rich of doing this. Yes, I make a little bit, but any author will tell you, you don't. This is not, you know, unless you're Stephen King, you know what I mean? Like authors don't, this is just not. And I'm writing about these niche, for the most part, these niche bands, and it's getting the word out. And I'm just a one man guy or a one man operation, like as far as promoting, right?
A one-man army, to quote another great Canadian band, Our Lady Peace.
Let's not go there. Um, Sorry, all due respect. But yes, you're correct. That is one of their song titles. But I shouldn't say that. I've got a lot of good support. You know what I mean? I've got a lot of good support. But yes, I mean, on the end of the day, it is my name on the book, so it's up to me to get the word out, right? So that's why I appreciate any support like this, word of mouth. All of that means so much. And if there's one thing that I could encourage people to do, if you do buy one of my books and like them, first of all, thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind taking a few moments, going on Amazon and leaving a review. What that does doesn't cost you a thing, but what that does is the next time somebody goes on and types in April wine, for example, if I get enough reviews, maybe my book will be one of the things that comes up as a recommendation, if that makes any sense. So I would, people could just take, it could be great book, highly recommended, you know? It sucks. I hate it. Whatever. I don't know what that does, but those type of reviews do. But I'm just saying that those reviews help. So, um, yeah, I don't know what more to say except it's been a fun ride and it's not over.
Yeah, Tim has more books coming, and I know about one of them, but mum's the word on that right now. So, everyone, you could just go to Amazon, type in the name Tim Durling, Durling, very easy. This one also has a forward by the great Martin Popoff, and all of his books will come up for you to order. You could also check out Tim on his channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and you've been on YouTube for over 10 years.
Yeah, I started in at the end of August. It'll be 12 years that
12
I
years.
started. Yeah, ended at the end of August 2014. And actually, if somebody just wants to type in timsvinylconfessions.com, what that does is take you to my link tree, and there's a link to all of my socials and each one of my books. And no matter where you are in the world, whatever your local countries or whatever your country's Amazon is, they should all have my books because they're all print to order. And they don't take long. My understanding is that 2 or 3 days and they've arrived.
I've always gotten mine very quickly, so within a day or two, I think, for the most part. But I try and order them when they come out. And also, check out Tim on the Contrarians channel. And I remember when the Contrarians YouTube channel started, I was right there from the get-go. I think it was summer of 2018. So I've been watching that channel for a
Yeah.
long time, almost as long as I've been watching Sea of Tranquility. So Tim is everywhere. He's on Grant's Rock Warehouse. He's on Bicycle Legs Talks Music. Finally, he's gotten to Cretan Classics. Thank you for your patience, Tim, because I've been on your channel a bunch of times, twice for the Kansas series, twice for Sammy Hagar. So it's about time I returned the favor and got you on Cretan Classics. And I appreciate your patience in allowing me to change the date because of a work thing, and then that I saw the Rush show last week. So I do appreciate your patience. Everyone go on Amazon, Tim Durling, check out his books, his YouTube channel. He's everywhere. And look forward to more books coming soon from Tim. Tim, thanks a lot. Anything else to add?
Really appreciate it, Davey. And I just have to say, what kind of jerk would I be if I said, no, you're not going to see Rush, you're talking to me. Like, for the love of God, go see Rush.
And I
We
did.
can do this later.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
And one last thing, if you want to talk about the show that's coming up on Tim's Vinyl Confessions that we spoke about earlier.
Yes, it was surreal because it's actually so I'm watching April Wine open for Triumph as I'm just finishing a book on the band. But yeah, the first time in a while, or the first time that it's ever happened that I've gone to see a band that I'd already done a book about. So last Saturday I saw, man, it's been one of the best triple bills I can think of seeing. So it was Deep Purple headlining. Kansas played before them, and they played almost a headline set. Like, it was a long set, and David Freeberg's version of Jefferson Starship opened, and they put on a fantastic show. Great triple bill, but Kansas were just amazing. And yes, uh, the lineup I saw, there are no original guys in the band, but every musician on that stage was reverent and faithful to the songs. Ronnie Platt has been a member of Kansas now for over 11 years. He is such a great vocalist and a great keyboard player. I guess it never clued in how much you're singing for Kansas that you've also got to play a lot of the keyboard parts, because you got a full-time keyboardist in Tom Brislin, but there's a lot of parts where there's a lot of counterpoint things going on. Um, it was incredible, and I'm so it was a great set. I'm so glad they did Jets Overhead from their last album, because I think that the last two Kansas albums are as strong as anything they've done, but obviously it wasn't their headline show. So if all you knew, I was thinking about this, if all you ever had by Kansas was that original 10 song best of that came out in 84, they played 8 of those songs. Um, a lot of left overture, a lot of point of no return, but it was great. It was a fantastic show. And Deep Purple, that's rock royalty. I'm so glad I got to see them. I'd never seen Purple before. Um,
I've seen
just
them a
amazing.
few times. So
So I've got as we're filming this, I've got a pretty extensive like road trip and concert review coming up for that. But it just gets to the essence of why I do all this. I love the music, and but seeing, after being so much in that Kansas world, doing this book and everything that comes with it, getting to sit back and go, yeah, that's like, and the best part, my son Jack was with me. He came with me to the Triumph show too, which is awesome. So he's kind of inherited that from me, his love for
how old
classic
is
rock.
Jack now, if I can ask?
Jack's he's going to be 23, so he's 22 now.
Ah,
I mean, he likes a little bit of it. He likes a lot of new stuff too, but he likes a lot of classic stuff. But when Kansas finished, I turned to him and said, "So that's why I wrote a book about them, because they're awesome." Um,
yes.
no, I don't want to take anything away from Purple, but I would have, if Kansas had been the headliner and that had been the end of the show, I would have been perfectly happy. Deep Purple was like the best bonus ever. But I'd only seen Kansas once before. I saw them in 1994, and I don't get a lot of shows like that. Again, I'm still in the eastern part of Canada, right? I haven't gone far. It's beautiful. I love it here, but we don't get as many classic rock shows because usually touring bands, if they come up to Canada, it's rare for them to come any further east than Toronto or Montreal. And maybe they'll come to Portland, Maine, which is a pretty long drive for me, but it's doable. I'm right on the Maine border. But it would be nice if they came somewhere that's a little closer. And in this case, they did. It's like, well, I better go. It's like that's why a lot of these shows get canceled. It's like, you know, what can I say? I know everything costs money, but it's like if you're on the fence about something, it's gonna, there will be a time when none of these bands will have any original members.
Right.
That's the sad reality of it that we're in. But all I know is I had an amazing time, and I think it's well documented on this show. Like you're going to see it. There are lots of clips, but they're clips. They're not meant to be. They're just like here's a little bit of this song, here's a little bit of that song. So that's all coming up. I do 3 new shows every weekend, as you know, and I post content on my socials daily.
It's a lot of content. And how do you juggle all of this will be my last question. How do you juggle a full-time job, a family, a YouTube channel, and now being an author for the past 5+ years?
Well, I've got 2 kids and they're both, they're both on their own. Like they're both working and, so they don't live here anymore. So there's, that's I just keep in contact with them. So, the way it usually works is that I work upstairs and my wife works downstairs. I mean, we don't work at the same job. But my office is my music room. So if I have a 15-minute break or something and I've got an idea, I could just go from one screen to the other and make a note of it. So um it hasn't been that much of a challenge, really. It's just but the thing is, I guess maybe this is a good thing about not maybe like not having a publisher or whatever. My only deadline is my own. You know what I mean? So it's not like you must have this done by such and such. It would be nice if I had things done at such time, but if I don't, it's not the end of the world.
Do you set aside,
So
I'm writing for the book for 2 hours today and then doing my YouTube channel for 1 hour? Do you schedule anything like that?
not usually. I mean, I am quite organized in that most of the time my episodes I don't do live. I'm not a great. It works for other people. I've had bad luck, and my sort of organizational, I guess you could call it OCD. I like to have episodes in the can at least 2 weeks worth, just in case. I don't like to wait too long before knowing that I know exactly what's going to play, a couple weeks from now. I feel like, oh my goodness, I don't have. So, sometimes I'll do on a weekend, I'll have 3 episodes done, you know. Um, I find if you set aside time, the time will fritter away. I try and wait till I'm inspired before I write something down.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I've gotten out of bed if when I thought, okay, this is a question I've got to ask about this album, and I just come in here and go, "Brrrr," or I'll send myself an email. More likely, I'll send myself an email say, make sure and mention this, and then I'll look at it the next morning, and my typing will be all messy, and I'll go, what is that supposed to say? Anyway, so so far, it works. It just works.
Okay. I think that's a great spot to end it, everyone. Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Check out his books on Amazon. Thank you for joining me, Tim. And Tim will be back in the near future on Cretan Classics, as we have discussed, but more on that at another time. Thanks again, Tim,
Thank you, sir.
and have a great night. And I'm Davey Cretan for Cretan Classics. Remember to always rock out, prog on, and pogo, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks, everyone. Take care.